All right, we've got the LS3 Miata in the shop today for some upgrades, but also some repairs. The problem is, not even sure what we need to fix, or what's wrong with it, rather. We know we need to fix something, don't know what's wrong with it. So that's the more pressing issue at hand. That's where we're gonna start before we get into the upgrades. Those aren't as necessary. The repair, crucial. We're about to have a lot of events back-to-back in this car. We need to make sure it's 100%. It's one of those issues where it's not a huge problem right now. Car still works, but if we don't address it, it could become a huge problem. So what's going on is, when I take off, specifically in second gear, and I slip the clutch, there's this gnarly grinding sound. I can feel it in the pedal, I can hear it in the transmission area. It kind of sounds like it's coming from the transmission. It might be the throwout bearing, it might be the pilot bearing, which we have a bushing actually. Could be any number of things. If it's the trans or the throwout bearing, we're in luck, not too bad. We can pull the trans out in the car. However, this being a Miata, and with how far back the engine is, we cannot pull the bell housing off in the car to get to the pilot bush. So what that would mean is dropping the engine out, which the way we do that on this car is just drop the whole front cradle out with the engine in it. So not terrible, I've done it enough times, but definitely would prefer not to do that. When you've got a rabbit hole situation where there's other things you want to do to the engine or whatever, it's not too bad, but like we're pretty good with the engine. There's nothing really I want to do. So I'm really hoping this can be solved just pulling the trans out. So that's where we're gonna start today. We're gonna get the trans yanked out of this thing. It's a little bit of a challenge with the long tube headers. They're just kind of in the way, but we've done it before, so we can do it again. I'm gonna quit jibber jabbering on about it and we're gonna get to work. This is one thing we need to rebuild, the skid plate. Or at least the legs on it. Kind of a funny operating procedure because to pull the exhaust we gotta pull the trans mount, which means we gotta support the trans with the trans jack, but we need to drop the headers before we can pull the trans out. We need to unbolt them, but we can't unbolt the headers and drop the headers down until the exhaust is off. So we're gonna have to go back and forth a little bit. I mean, this thing will pretty much hang out by itself without the trans jack. The engine kind of just hits a firewall anyway, so just funny. I forgot that's a little backwards how I usually do it. All right, now we go up top, drop the headers down. So this header actually drops really far down. The other header, the driver's side, because of the steering shaft, it doesn't hardly drop at all. And that's where we have trouble getting the trans out. It was a lot easier when I had cast iron manifolds. It looks like we got no exhaust leaks, so that's nice. I don't see any black marks outside of the ring. All right, everything is done up top. As far as I can remember, we gotta go back underneath. At least I did myself a favor and I didn't put the hard bolt back in. Or well, the one hard bolt. This one's a little tricky to get to. I think we can get it. I'm gonna put the rails on this thing just to be safe. All right, now for the not so fun part. Wrangling this thing out of here. Problem, like I said, is this one header. Oh, we're close. We're close. Ah, okay. Well, that wasn't all that awful. Need to notch that for next time. The throwout bearing doesn't look great. It doesn't look bad either. Clutch line is caught. I'm gonna climb up there with a ladder. Alright. Pilot bushing looks good. Might be the trans itself. Decent bit of play in our input shaft. We'll get this in the shop, we'll dig into it. Might be input shaft bearing. Does not seem too hot. I'll have to compare against the other CD I've got. All right, we got the transmission out. I think the input shaft bearing is really on its way out. There is a decent bit of play here. If you look at my old transmission, it's got some play, but not quite as much. I don't know, man. It's hard to tell. I mean, it's hard to tell. Just, oh, does it wiggle more? So this transmission I had in the car for 2-3 years, and I just started having issues early at clutch kickers just with getting it into third gear. It didn't want to shift great. It's not so much that it would grind or clunk or anything. It just, I don't know. It was just kind of tough to power shift it. So I had this trans sitting around. So this was the trans I put in the car originally when I built it with the first motor, which Rod knocked first event because I didn't have a good oil system, and it wouldn't go into fifth. And I found out later that you have to shave the selector rod down, otherwise it'll hit the adapter plate sometimes. So I wish I would have known that when I put this together the first time. But anyway, I had a theory that this trans, it wasn't that fifth was bad, it was that selector rod was too long. So anyway, I pulled that trans out, put this trans in just to see if the third gear shift issue was something with the shifter or the clutch, or if it was actually the transmission. And it does shift a lot better, this transmission. And what do you know, fifth does work now that I shaved that selector rod down. So anyway, we haven't had this transmission in there very long, but pretty much all the associating stuff has been in there for a little over a year. So I did figure out what the problem was. So if we measure our input shaft, got 15.7, it's really like 15.7. Now let's measure the socket, upside down, 17.3. So it's about 1.5 mil larger. Now we obviously can't measure our pilot bushing because it's all the way down in there. We'd have to pull everything off to measure that. But we know what this is. We know this is a mil bigger than the input shaft. Yeah, I would say it's safe to say that's pretty well worn out. So that basically means that this had virtually no support, and I'm pretty stoked this thing lasted the whole Clutch Kickers event. It started doing it right at the start of the event. Like first practice lap, I slipped the clutch in second going into the burnout box because I always start in second at the track, and I felt it and heard the grinding. So I tried to take it easy on it the whole event and be really careful with the clutch kicks and clutch slipping and so on and so forth. And it made it through. It made it through the whole time, and we managed to win. So we had to go through a lot of rounds, and it held together for us. So I can't even be mad at the old girl, but it's got to get fixed. Now the problem is to fix it, we have to pull the engine out. So to get to that pilot bushing, we got to pull the clutch off. To pull the clutch off, we got to pull the bell housing off. To get the bell housing off, we got to drop the engine because, as you can see, there's one clutch bell housing bolt. There's one bell housing bolt up there. That one's close to the firewall too. There's just no way this is coming out in the car with how small our tunnel is. I mean, as you would expect, it's a Miata with a V8 in it. So that brings me to a dilemma. We got to pull the engine out. while you're there, rabbit hole, do we want to upgrade? So if we stick with this setup, we definitely need to get another CD. I know for a fact that one doesn't shift amazing. I think it's a decent trans, but the 2-3 shift is the one shift we do at the track. The run up can make or break you at clutch kickers. I mean, we're going against cars with 800 to 1,000 horsepower. We make 500. Like, we can't afford it to have to slow shift or short shift or anything like that. Like, we got to be optimal in the run up. So for my situation, we'd have to get another trans. Now, the used trans CDs have gone up in price. I bought both of these for $500. They're like $1,000 now. You can buy a new one for $1,700, but they're like everything else in the parts industry, they're out of stock. So what do we do? That's the big question here. Aside from swapping another one of these setups back in, we could go with a dog box. Now, if you're familiar with what a dog box is, it is a straight cut gear race transmission. So there's no synchronizers to make the gear shift smooth. That's why you get that clunk. If you ever heard someone put a dog box into gear, and put it in gear, and the whole car shake, clunk. It's like the most manly thing ever. I love it. I've always wanted a dog box. I'll be honest, I always have. But they're expensive, and they require maintenance, and it's going to be we need everything. We need a belt housing, we need a new clutch, we need a new drive shaft, we'll have to build a new trans mount. So there's a lot of things that are going to have to change to put a dog box in the car. And they're expensive. I mean, like, a decent refreshed one's like $7-8 grand. Like, they're not cheap. So I'm at a bit of a dilemma. The main reason is because, do I see myself building another drift car in the future? A competition drift car? I don't know. I kind of want to. Kind of don't want to. Kind of want to keep running this. Kind of want to build a drag car instead, or build some other stuff. So that kind of is where the big dilemma lies, because it's like, do I really want to put 8-10 grand into putting a better transmission in this car if I'm going to build a vet in 6-8 months? But on the flip side, this car did just win me 10 grand. So, I mean, it's earned itself some love and some upgrades, and we know it's a capable competitive car at these shootout type events. And, it's like, well, what if I don't put a better trans in it and I break a trans at an event I could have won if I had a trans that would have held up? So I don't know. I know I'm jibber jabbering on. I'm just kind of trying to share my thought process with you guys because I'm struggling a bit on what to do here. So I'm looking into the whole dog box situation, see if we can get one. I've got an event I really want to drive in 2 weeks. So trying to get a whole setup here and done in that time is going to be a little tight. But moral of the story is, all of this leads me to tell you that we're kind of at a pause with the transmission situation at the moment. So we're going to move on to another project. What we need to do is rebuild this expansion tank. This was the first aluminum TIG project I've ever done, and it's not the best. The fitment could be a lot better as far as like the pieces to each other. I did blow it apart at the seams at the Freedom Factory, sending it a little too hard, and just split it open. I welded it back together, and it's been fine. It's just, we have a little bit of a coolant leak. I think a lot of it was our cap. I pressure tested the system and the cap was leaking. But this thing it needed to be replaced for a long time. So I want to go ahead and build a new one. We've gotten a lot better at cutting and fitting and even welding. So I think we can make a lot nicer piece than this one. And it shouldn't take too much time. So we need to get this one out, drain all our water, and whip out some CAD. It's gonna be weird to not have this thing in here like as it is. I've had this thing in here forever. Alright, so I am going to change things up a bit from this design. We're not just rebuilding this. So when I built this, my idea was this is the expansion tank. So this is a pressurized part of the cooling system. And the reason for this is because our radiator is too low to fill our system and bleed all the air out. We needed something higher. So this is, again, part of the pressurized cooling system. Imagine this is part of the radiator, just detached. And then this is the overflow. So I wanted to build them into the same unit. However, I don't really need this big of an overflow. I don't really need this big of an expansion tank. I want to shrink this down a bit and make it look a lot nicer too. So yeah, break out the CAD. Look at this. Tire rubber, tire debris. That stuff goes everywhere. So here is our cardboard template. I do need to trim the back just a little bit if I want to put it here. If I try to put it over here, then it's kind of in the way of the dry sump lines. Chop the back off it, trim it, make sure it still fits, and then we'll start making this out of some aluminum. All right, I want to go ahead and figure out where I want my fittings to be. I think that's a good spot for it. Oh, I don't know. Do I want it to be dead center with that? It's got to be pretty much all the way forward for that. For some reason, it just looks goofy there. And I guess maybe I should have made it a little shorter. I like that. We're gonna go with that. Need to determine where my fittings are gonna go. So the tricky thing here is this is 1/2 inch line, this is 5/8. We're gonna try to use push lock AN fittings. So the reason I had this ugly brass fitting set up in this one is because I didn't want to deal with welding AN fittings to the water pump, because then, you know, if I needed to put water pump, I couldn't just get one from the parts store and throw it in, which is the beauty of having an LS, is you can get parts locally. However, I have a spare water pump, so I could definitely weld AN fittings on, but we're gonna try to go this route if we can. So I'm gonna grab some weld-on deals, mock these up, and mark where we need them. All right, we've got all of our holes done for our AN fittings, and then for our radiator outlet cap holder deal. So I've got my CAD templates for these 3 pieces. You know what? I might be pushing it. I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna try to make this in one piece. It's gonna be hard because I can't bend this radius here, like the exact radius. I have to bend it, like bend, and then let it sink in a little bit because it doesn't perfectly match the curve. So trying to get 2 more pieces on there might be a little tricky, but all this is kind of hidden, so I might as well make it one piece. Let's try it. Well, that honestly fits pretty good. Kind of have to deal with this sunken in area in the middle. The other 2 I built are like that. I can't match this curvature exactly. But, I mean, we got all 3 pieces into one. Can't complain about that. So I'm going to clean this up, tack it up, weld it up. Then we can weld the fittings on and we're freaking done with this thing. Well, we need to make mounts, but we're pretty much done. Past that, I'm going to quit jibber jabber and let's weld it. Alright, got it done. I almost forgot the 4AN deal for the steam port. That was like one of my main reasons for rebuilding it, because I wanted to put the steam port there because the radiator one's kind of clogged. I'll grab the other one so we can compare them complete. It's still very hot. Man, it is pretty wild to compare these. This is what like 3 years of practice does. Obviously it's way smaller and a little different, so it looks better in that way too, but that's just a factor of building it. But anyway, let's test fit it. It's cooled off enough, finally. I need to shorten this hose up, push it on a little further so it's not pushing against this. I'm gonna pressure test this. We'll see if we got any leaks before we start installing it. Alrighty, got it all in here. Man, what a difference that makes. It looks so much better. It really spruces up the engine bay. One, just the fit and finish of it, you know, it being less pieces, better welding than last time. It as a base looks a lot better, but it being smaller and being able to use the AN push lock fittings. I'm really happy we were able to do that as opposed to the freaking thread taped Home Depot brass fittings. I think I actually ordered these online, but I mean, you could probably get them at Home Depot. So yeah, overall, super happy with it. We get the looks of the AN without the issues that come with it, having to weld the fittings on, easy to get these rubber hoses at a parts store, etc., etc. So really, really happy with that. Really glad we got it done. This is one of those, I have had this project on my like tentative to-do list for probably over a year now, since I think before that one blew up. And I took it out, was like, I'm going to rebuild it. I'm going to build a new one. Didn't do it. Ended up fixing that one, putting it back in. And the past several times I've done some work on this car, I've said I was going to do it. And finally did it. So anyway, I'm just happy. It's so much nicer than before. So I do still have a couple things to do. I need to weld these tabs on to mount it. I might have to add a third one back here. The hose is just kind of like pull it a little crooked. And then I do need to get a shorter 4AN line for the steam port, but that's okay because we don't really need to put it back together right this second because we're going to be pulling the engine out in the next couple days. I've decided we're going to fix it with the CD setup, get it back together, put it back in the car, and keep ripping. Now, there's a few reasons. Biggest thing is the lead time on a dog box, unless I magically stumble into a used one with like good ratios, is 4 weeks. Which means not only will we miss the event that I'm really trying to go to in like a week and a half, we'd miss the one after that, and we'd miss clutch kickers, which if we miss the next round of clutch kickers, it kind of defeats the purpose of doing it because there's only one round left. So like, am I going to swap a dog box in just for one more round? It'd be better to wait till the end of the season. And then on top of that, like my biggest justification for doing this was, well, if I got to pull the engine out anyway, I might as well, you know, because it makes me feel better about having to pull the engine, and it gives me an excuse to buy a dog box. If it's all back together and working, then that kind of all falls apart. And in reality, I think if I'm going to go that route, it makes more sense to just start building another car. You know, I go back and forth on this all the time. I change my mind all the time. So don't hold me to it, but I think that's going to be the best option because at the end of the day, no matter what we do to this car, we can still only do shootout style events with it. And it's like, well, I'm going to put all that time and effort and money into it to make it better. I'd want to be able to do something else with it, like Pro Spec, if I decided to go that route. So that's a big reason. And then also, I think a one thing that's really pushing me towards building another car is, you know, I built this car originally 3 years ago, and me putting together a car 3 years ago is a lot different than me putting a car together today. I've learned a lot. I've gotten a lot better at putting cars together, a lot better attention to detail. So this car is solid, and obviously it works great, and it's been fine, and we've upgraded things along the way, but there's just a lot of different things I'd like to change. So I think it'd be nice to start with a fresh base, a car that we could run Pro Spec in, and then, you know, start out with the idea of building a race car. You know, when I built this car originally, it was supposed to be a street car too. I figured I'd be driving it on the street all the time. I never drive it on the street. It is basically a pure race car, but I've got carpet and, you know, I didn't do a lot of things that you would do to make it a better race car because I wanted it to be decent street car too. So anyway, that's kind of where my head's at. I don't think it really makes sense to put a dog box in this. We're going to fix this thing. We're going to get it back up and running because we got a lot of back-to-back drifting to do the next month and a half or so. And we'll see where we can go from there. You know, start looking into getting another chassis and building it. So anyway, I know that was a lot of jibber jabbering, but that was kind of the whole point of this video, figure out what's wrong with it and decide what we're going to do. So that's the decision. We're going to be pulling the engine out, fixing this thing, getting it back together, and ripping it as usual. That being said, we are out of time for tonight. I'll finish this up and we'll tear into this thing in the next couple days. So I hope to see you guys for that. But for now, that's going to be it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Goodbye.